Hello and welcome to another episode of Healing with Nama. I'm Casey, aka Nama, and I'm so excited for our topic today. We are diving into generational trauma today, and I am really excited to have a guest here with me today to share her thoughts on the topic. Today I have Danielle Washington, a certified Reiki master teacher and retreat facilitator. She is the founder of Rogue Experiences, curating wellness, travel experiences, and retreats, and the Hello Well with Danielle podcast host. She is the author of Travel is My Therapy and the Redefine Your Mindset 21-Day Journal. Her mantra is put your mask on first, which stands as a reminder that making yourself a priority is the ultimate act of self-love. And I'm so happy to have you here today, Danielle. Welcome to you. I'm so grateful. You're actually the first guest that I've had on my show, so yay.
Yeah, I get to pop a cherry.
Yes. Yes, so you are actually the first guest I have on the show, and I'm just really excited to have met you and connected with you, another Black Reiki practitioner. So do you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, no, I think you did an awesome job. I'm like, what about me? I'm from California, so if you hear Northern California at that, so if you hear the word hella, it's just a part of who I am. I think my friends can make a drinking joke out of it because I use the word hella times. But I'm a Bay Area native. For me, I feel like I've been creating what I'm calling this wellness revolution to help women of color, get out of survival mode and get out of, it is what it is and, break free to live the life that they want to live. And I think this topic is so important because ancestral trauma plays a large role in us living in quote unquote survival mode. So I'm just happy to be here.
Yes, and I'm so excited to talk to you about it too. This is something that is very important to me, especially as an African American woman. It's something that is a large part of our community, unfortunately, and I think it causes a lot of the issues and the traumas that we see in current generations is because past generations never, dealt with the trauma that they dealt with, and so it just goes down the line and before you know it, somebody has to stop it. And for me, I'll talk about it a little bit later. That's been my role, is to be the one to start a new trend. And so yeah, I will talk about that a little bit, what that experience is like for me.
And I think you brought up a good point because a huge part of it is acknowledging the trauma. And you think about it, we have not been taught that slavery was traumatic. We have been taught that it's something that happened, but it was never deemed as traumatic to us. Right. But if you really think about it, and I saw this in an article, and I thought it was just a great, kind of picture, imagination, visualization of what occurred. It's like, you're in Africa, you're chilling, you're having a great time, you're hanging out with your family and your community, you're loved, you're protected, and then someone snatches you. Right. And then you're snatched and then brought on this boat. Wow. And you barely survived that, but somehow you made it. Yeah. And then brought into this other place where you don't understand, you don't know, and you're beaten, you're tortured, and all these different things. And then over time, we're taught to learn how to survive in the system. And then you teach your children how to survive in the system. And they teach their children, and it is passed down, not just by actions and experiences, but inherited in our DNA. And that's the trauma that started, that we aren't acknowledging.
Yes, that's so true. I always hear, and my mom is a sociologist. She has a degree in sociology, and she is like the activist, and anything to her is always about race. And she always says, the system is not created for us. It wasn't designed for us. So whether that be the prison system, the school system, the American system was not designed for us. And so we are constantly having to figure out how to navigate through a system that never was for us. We weren't supposed to exist here as people. We were supposed to be accessories. And so now we're like, we're still trying to figure it out, and things have gotten better, but they're nowhere near equal. And so that was my thought process behind just having this topic and really kind of digging deep into it. So before we really get into it, I wanted to just talk about what generational trauma is and just kind of give a brief definition of it that I found on goodtherapy.org. And goodtherapy.org describes generational trauma, which can also be called transgenerational trauma or intergenerational trauma, as trauma that gets passed down from those who directly experience an incident to subsequent generations. And so it's basically exactly what we're talking about. The trauma, not all of the trauma that we experience is our own. But because it's unhealed, we experience our own trauma, and it just, the cycle continues. So I wanted to just kind of get your thoughts and pick your brain about how you feel on this and what your experience has been like.
So my experience on this is that for most of my life, I didn't even think about it. It was just like, again, it is what it is. I'm Black, we got to work twice as hard, not to be deemed lazy. I need to, be careful about what I say and how I move because my life can be put in danger. They're just things that inherent, it's you're not aware of. It's just like, this is just the way life is. This is just the way that I was born, and I can't change the reality of my life until I got older and I started learning a little bit more about ancestral trauma. And I'm still learning. I'm still a student of learning more about this and the psychology behind slavery. And so I do think that it has played a huge part in my life, but I'm just now discovering it, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah, that makes so much sense. And for me, I think the experience, like you said, has always been happening, but the actual understanding of it didn't happen for me until my mom started going to school, and she started to dive deep into sociological perspectives and really start understanding from a sociological perspective what is actually happening to us, because psychologically you understand what it does to your brain, your body, your behavior and all those different things, but from a sociological standpoint, it is embedded in our society to ensure that us as Black people do not progress. And so you think of something like the school to prison pipeline, or the higher rates of incarceration for Black and brown people in our country, and impoverished, redlining, all those different things are purposefully done to keep us from progressing, And so it's now for me, it's like, okay, well, how do I, one, raise awareness about it, and make people aware of what's happening? And then two, how do I navigate through this world in a different way, knowing that just because I'm deciding to do something different doesn't mean that everybody else around me is going to be doing it differently, doesn't mean that the world is going to change. But how do I navigate in this world that I've been put in and thrive and not just survive,
And that's hard. I mean, it goes back to the acknowledgement of that this trauma existed. And even looking at inherited trauma, like it wasn't really a popular thing. It didn't spike into like psychology fields and industries until they started looking and noticing children of the Holocaust were experiencing, anxiety and nightmares and heightened alertness. And so it wasn't until then that this became a thing that people were like, oh, maybe we should look into this, and, trickle it down. They thought, oh yeah, slavery might have been traumatic too. I mean, that's 300 years of being oppressed definitely makes a difference. So imagine, the kids of Holocaust they were noticing enough to where they started studying it. We have just begun the true study of the effects of slavery. And so there's still a lot for us to understand. And again, most of us are unknowingly dealing with ancestral trauma and have no clue that, when we are repeating, familiar habits or coping strategies, or dealing with fears and anxiety, or feeling stuck and don't know why, those are often signs of, unhealthy energetic ancestral attachments.
Right. Yeah. And it's also on a spiritual level too, because you and I are both Reiki practitioners. And so, of course, it has to spiritually affect you, because our ancestors were slaves, our ancestors were kings and queens, all of that trauma is also spiritually embedded in us. And so you also have to think about, energetic clearing, not just therapy and all those different types of things. You have to think about what you're carrying inside of your body and in your DNA. You are, I don't want to say made from, but it is embedded in you. That trauma is kind of stuck. It can get stuck, I feel.
And there's not even I feel there's the scientific knowledge of that. It doesn't change your DNA sequence, but the science has shown that it changes the DNA structure. So trauma definitely does scientifically change your DNA. And so it's definitely something that we need to think about. I know for me, I did an ayahuasca ceremony a couple of years ago, and I'm in it. And ayahuasca is, I don't know how to explain it. Ayahuasca is a psychedelic that's utilized for spiritual healing. And, most people go through different realms and whatever.
Wow.
For me, I went through my ancestors.
Wow.
I literally felt like my one ancestor would come after another. I felt like I was a checkout person, and would one after another would come through my body. And I felt like I was physically being beat. I felt like I physically was giving birth or being raped and having my children taken away. I felt, all the different things. And imagine I'm going through this in one night, and I had to, and it was hard. I'm like crying. I had people who were there supporting me, but I had to recognize that, this is one night, a couple minutes of it happening and then going away and happening, going away. But my ancestors went through years, their entire life of going through these things. And one of the shamans that I work with, told me that one of my ancestors was a queen in Africa, and she, made a pact with dark magic. Whether you believe any stuff or not, this is what he said. So I'm just going with it. So I'm like, okay, bet she was a queen. Fab, love that. But she made a pact with the dark magic, and she thought it would be better with, for her people who were being snatched over and dealing with slavery. And, hindsight 2020, it wasn't better. And so my family, quote unquote, was cursed. And it was a curse that, he said that you have to break. Your family has this, generation after generation has dealt with this curse. And it reminds me of a quote. I think it's from James Baldwin in one of his books. He said, could a curse come down so many ages, or do we live in the time or in the moment? I'm just like, yeah, I look at things in my family, and there's certain patterns that I've seen. And I've seen, once again, I became aware of ancestral trauma. I've seen patterns that I'm like, oh, that must be part of our healing that we needed to heal. And we're still going through it. Like, it sucks. I wish we didn't have this. And, not everyone even is open to acknowledging and then, working on it within the family. So how do you go about healing the entire family if you're just one?
Right. And I think that's where I am. I have never done, that type of ceremony, and it sounds really interesting. And I would be so interested to see what would happen, if I were to participate in something like that, because I feel like I am what they call the generational curse breaker, I hear you having an aha moment or something.
No, I just was agreeing with you.
Oh, okay. I feel like it stops with me, and I've always been different. I've always been told I was an old soul. I was the different one. I felt like the black sheep of the family because I just didn't go along with what everybody else was doing. The chaos and, dysfunction that was going on around me. I just always felt uncomfortable around it. And I just felt like, this isn't right. Some of the things that are going on around me, this isn't right. This isn't how you're supposed to be. And how do you know that if you're, 5 years old, all you know is how your family is. But for me, it's always been, it's something, I don't fit in with this. This isn't how my life should be. But coincidentally, I still have those thought patterns in my head that go against that. And I have these ideals about marriage and relationships and communication that go along with what I've been raised in, obviously, because, I was there. So, of course, it's going to be embedded in me. So I find myself in that internal battle of wanting to change my innate habits and behaviors and thought patterns and beliefs that go along more so with who I feel I really am, and kind of fighting with that internal self and that ego self.
And the thing about that, and I totally resonate with everything you said, because I'm like, oh my God, that sounds like my lifestyle. And I have to be the first one to admit that I was like, nah, I ain't signing up for this. That seems like a lot of work. And, the universe, creator, God, whoever you want to call your, higher up source, kept pushing me towards it. And I'm like, okay, no, I know you want me to do something and, be bigger and greater and help the community and, heal from these things. But for so many years, I can honestly say I was like, nah, I was ducking and hiding and self-sabotaging and, moving away from it. And each year it was like more and more. It's like, nope, sis, this is you. This is your calling. And if I look in my, astrology and a bunch of other things, it all kind of points all to this.
Right.
But I didn't want to deal with it because I'm like, this is a lot.
It is. And it's very stressful. I have been going through what I feel is my second dark night of the soul in the last couple of months. And I found myself asking, like, why me? Like, I didn't ask for this. I didn't want to do this. I just want to be a normal person. Why can't I just go along with dysfunction? Or, why can't I just, why does everything have to affect me so much? I can't just settle. I cannot do that. My physical being will not allow me to settle for certain things. And it's like, I got frustrated at a certain point because it's like, I believe in certain, soul contracts and stuff like that. And it's like, well, your soul signed up for this before you were born. It was like, well, I didn't have anything to do with that, like that was my soul. I didn't know. I'm just here, and so I've had those conversations with, my divine connection, and I believe in God and, angels and all that kind of stuff. And at a certain point, I just had to accept it and just say, like you said, it kind of, this is you, this is how it's going to be, this is how it is. And the more you fight it, the harder it's going to be. It's already going to be difficult, but if you continue to push against it and resist it, it's going to be that much worse. And you're going to be unhappy while you're still continuing to do this work, because it's happening whether you want to be a part of it or not. It's happening.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's just like, at a certain point, it's like you said, okay, sis, you either do it happily or you do it, begrudgingly, but you're going to do it. So,
and this work comes in stages. Like, even whether you first acknowledge it, like, okay, I acknowledge that, I most likely have some kind of, I think there was a sociologist, her name is Dr. Joy. I'm going to botch her last name. I think it's
DeGruy, I think. DeGruy, yeah. Post-traumatic slave syndrome.
Exactly.
Right.
And whether you acknowledge, okay, I have PTSD, which post-traumatic slave syndrome. All right, do I have that? Okay, good. Okay, I acknowledge I have it. Then what? It's like, and you go through stages of healing, because we can't just do it in, excuse me, in one course or one ceremony. Like, okay, now I'm healed. I'm able to move forward. This is generation after generation after generations. I don't know who it was. It might have been Ayana Van, who does like an amazing ancestral healing course as well, that talked about it. I think like 7 generations that trauma lasts in your body. And so slavery for me was 3 generations away.
Mm-hmm.
And I look at that, I'm like, I'm the 3rd generation away from slavery, and then that's not far.
Yeah, that's like, it's not as far back as people think. I think because people feel so far removed from it and they may not have experienced it, it feels like it was, this long, long time ago. And it's like, your great could have been, a slave, or was probably a slave, depending on how old you are. It really isn't that far away. And I think something that I just thought about for me, because you are also from California, I'm from Southern California. And I think for me anyway, my experience, because I didn't grow up, I grew up in a liberal place, I didn't grow up around a lot of Black people or, my roots, my heritage. So when you come to somewhere that's in the South, it's a totally different experience. And you can kind of understand why people behave the way that they do, or, have the belief systems that they do, because it's still very deeply embedded in certain places in the South. And I have that, cognitive kind of awareness or even a fear, because right now I'm in Texas, so I'm kind of hyper aware sometimes of like, am I going to be racially profiled, and, like what's going to happen here, because I'm from, this liberal place, and everybody, pretty much gets along. If it's racism, it's probably covert. You don't really experience it in the way that you do in the southern region of our states. And I think that it's kind of a wake-up call for me to kind of think about, like, this is still a part of your history, It's not something that I really had to think about before, but it's still very relevant. And so I think it's something that I want to explore more deeply and not fear, going back to the South and where my grandmother is from in Alabama, and really discovering my roots, and kind of understanding it.
You brought up such a good point, because we talk about slavery, but there was Jim Crow. We forget that was just as traumatic. I mean, maybe not just as traumatic, but it was traumatic in its own way. Mm-hmm. And honey, that's one generation for most of us.
Right.
That's one generation away. And like, I remember my parents talk about when we were kids, my from the South. My mom's from Texas. My dad's from Louisiana, even though my mom's family was originally from Louisiana, but she was born in Texas. And we drove, from California to Texas or Louisiana. I don't know which one it was. But my parents said they remember there was a point when we stopped somewhere to get drinks or go to the bathroom. And I think I went into the white bathroom. I did something. Me being me, I did something I wasn't supposed to do. Whoops, my bad. Right. My parents were like, and they tell me the story. It'd be like, we had to haul, behinds out of there quickly. And we left without even doing anything, getting food. We're like, we had to leave right away. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, wow, okay. That was a time when, that's the 70s. I was born in the 70s. So that's still going on in the 70s. And I think about stories of my uncle who looked at a white woman the wrong way. And my grandmother immediately put him on a train because she knew that they were going to come to go kill him. And they did come. Wow. My dad still has the traumatic memory of white people coming in, bashing into their door with flashlights in his face looking for my uncle. But my dad was so much younger than my uncle, they knew that was not him. Mm-hmm. And so it's not so far removed.
Yeah, it really isn't. And I've been blessed, thank God, to not have had to face, that type of overt racism, thank God. But that internalized racism obviously is just as bad, just kind of knowing that there are people out there who do have those thoughts and those opinions. And then for me, I worked for most of my, working years, worked in a more affluent community in Southern California. And so it wasn't a lot of Black people. Many times I would be the only, Black person in the workspace. So of course it's gonna, come through my mind of like, oh my gosh, they're acting a little weird. Is it because I'm Black? Or, you always just have that thought of, am I supposed to be here? And so, I mean, this topic, you can talk so much about it. But I think that for me, it's just kind of understanding and knowing that it's not going to go away. Uh-huh. And then, like I said, in the beginning, how do I move forward knowing that I am the curse breaker? What does that look like for me? And what does that look like for my family? Like you said, there are people in the family who just are never going to change. The older generation in my family, they're not trying to hear anything that I'm talking about. It just kind of is what it is. So how does, what does that look like for me, I think, is where I am right now.
And I think a lot of that looks like, whether you're, if you have children, it's how we parent.
Right.
If you think about how I could talk about how my parents parented, it was like, you're meant to be seen, not heard. Mm-hmm. And again, that goes back to the Jim Crow timeframe that they grew up in. They were meant to be seen. They could be seen, but they sure couldn't be heard, because that was a problem. Because God forbid they may say the wrong thing. They may touch the wrong thing. So that mentality that my parents constantly told me, kids are supposed to be seen, not heard. That goes back to the ancestral trauma. Then you also go with, my parents always taught us that, you're supposed to work twice as hard, just to be deemed as average and not be deemed as lazy. Because it goes back to that slavery trauma of, if you're deemed lazy, you could be beaten and if not killed.
That's
and it
true.
was all part of the survival. And so, how we go about parenting and parenting from a different place, a place from healing. And again, that goes back to that knowledge of acknowledging that trauma and that pattern of mentality of, we got to work harder. We got to, not be seen. I'm not being loud, and when we reparent our children in a different way, that's one of the first steps in this healing.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. And I was going to tell you to feel free to use any, language, colorful language, whatever, however you speak. This is an open space. I heard you trying to censor yourself. I'm like, I already, on the podcast, just marked that it may be explicit because I want people to feel free to express themselves how they do. Healing is not linear and it can't be contained into a little box. So however you express yourself, I want you to feel free to do that on this show. But I think you
Thanks, because I do swear quite often.
I mean, you know what? Go for it. I don't personally, unless I'm really upset. My family knows if I start cursing, then, somebody's made me really upset. But I know that other people do. So, I'm not immune to it at all.
Thank you.
Yeah. But what you said about, parenting and stuff, I was going to ask you that question too, of how does that, change the way that you were brought up and, the way that your family dealt with or did not deal with trauma, or, just communication affect the way that you relate to people in friendships and relationships. I don't know if you're a mother, but parenting, I don't have any kids, but I do have, opinions on that. But I was curious about your thoughts.
So I don't have kids, but you would think that I had 3. My niece and nephews pretty much feel like my own kids. And so I do feel like I have played a decent role in their parenting. But again, they're now 22, 19, and 17. I wasn't thinking about this trauma back when they were kids. I wish I was. I wasn't thinking about, different ways of telling them different things. Like now I show up in a different space and, kind of give them my perspective from where I am currently, but I wish I was that way before. But then I think about think about my father. My father was emotionally unavailable. And that really hurt me as a child, and it still hurt me as an adult until I started doing this work. And I started realizing that, when you were taught and lived in these, from generation to generation to focus on being strong and just moving forward, he wasn't given the tools to express and manage his emotions. And a lot of people, not even your emotions, they're not given the tools to manage their stress. And I look at my mother, and that's a huge thing that she was not given. And that's part of this ancestral trauma. And so for me, the way it's helped me in seeing how my parents parented me and how I try to reparent my niece and nephews is by having compassion, of recognizing that my parents did the best that they could with what they had.
Right.
And then saying that I did with my niece and nephews, I did the best that I could with the knowledge I had.
Right.
And when you know better, you can now choose to do better.
Right. Yeah. When you were talking, I'm like, we have so many similarities. I also have 2 nieces and a nephew. I also am their second mother. Like, I joke all the time, like, those are my kids. And I've been with them, all 3 of them, since the day they were born. I saw 2 of them being born. And those are my kids. And like you said, I have my niece, my oldest is 21. My nephew is about to turn 19 in February. And then the youngest one is 2. So I feel like I've kind of been given a second chance with the 2-year-old to kind of do something different, because when my niece and nephew were born, I was 10 and 12 years old. I didn't know, any of this stuff. I had no knowledge of trying to do anything better. And I really didn't have any authority, at 10 years old, 12 years old. So, unfortunately, they kind of got the short end of the stick, and now they are kind of watching me transform and change into this person and kind of understanding why I'm doing it. And they like it, they find it interesting and stuff. But as far as raising them up in it, that ship has sailed. And so I try with my niece, my youngest niece, to be mindful about how I treat her and how I quote unquote parent her, because I'm not her parent, but I am her third parent. And, how I talk to her and things that I say, and why am I reacting this way? Why am I talking to her like that? Is it just because that's how I was trained to do, or is it because it's what she actually needs, So just being more mindful of what she needs, because I don't have children of my own. I feel like I've been a parent since I was 10 years old. But I want her experience, at least of me, to be different. And I want her to see somebody doing something different than what was modeled, around her, not saying that anybody's doing anything, terrible, but it's just a different experience being the only person that's really deeply into spirituality and healing and understanding. I want her to see what that looks like so that she has an alternative when she gets older and has that choice,
And it's the awareness that you're giving them, the awareness through your actions. And that's important. They need to see that.
Yeah. So I think that's just the main thing is like, even though our whole life has been this way and this is what we've seen, we don't have to stay in that. We always have the chance and the opportunity to pivot and make a different choice. And for me, that catalyst was, I don't know if you believe in it or not, but meeting my twin flame, that changed the whole game for me. That was a catalyst for my entire spiritual journey and has kind of led me to where I am today. Obviously, I did all the work, but, just having that encounter kind of turned my life upside down in a way where I could not continue doing what I had been doing before. So I had to kind of think about all these different things and kind of change the game, I guess, like you said.
Yeah, and I haven't dived deep into the twin flame situation. Like, I know of it, but I haven't gone through or really researched and understood it to the point where I'm like, oh, what is this? And let's do more.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, a lot of it has been through kind of reconnecting with my ancestors, and that came through many different ways. I feel like I started part of my spiritual journey and not really realizing I was starting it in Cuba. I take, telling you that I take these women on trips around the world.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the places I would constantly go was Cuba. And within going to Cuba, I was introduced more intimately into, the world of Santeria and learning about that and learning about the, traditions and customs. And when wanting to learn who my Orishas were, I'm like, I want to know who's my parents. I was working with a Babala, which is like a priest, and he was like, no, we can't tell you because you need to learn your roots. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? I mean, my friend who was Filipino got her people. I'm like, well, why can't I know my roots?
Right.
I'm like, why couldn't I know? I'm I'm more Black than she is. I'm not saying that mattered,
right,
but it was what it was in my mind. I was like, whoa, what's this? Like, I want to know. And it led me on a journey to understand, what did this man speaking Spanish to me who didn't speak English, what did he mean by I need to know my roots? And so, I go to Africa and, I speak to African healer there, and I didn't get much information there. I got some stuff, but not much. And, I talked to different, person in IFA, I've done other research and I've learned through all these different things that I needed to connect with my ancestors, and through, Akashic readings and through, Ifa reading and through, other divination and people who are intuitive. It's like they all keep saying, dude, your ancestors are trying to speak to you.
Yeah.
And you are just ignoring every single thing and every single situation. And it was, I think, really in Bali, which I was chilling, trying to heal from. I had 6 people die in 1 year.
Oh my gosh.
And 2 of them were people who were the people who I deemed loved me the most. And that was really hard. And I was caregiving for them on top of that.
Right.
And so they both died. And I had 3 friends who didn't know each other all pretty much say the same thing. It's like, sis, you're being hella dismissive. You're being aggressive. You're grieving. And I'm like, the first day, I'm like, you're on crack. I'm like, you're just being overly sensitive. Get over yourself. And then the third person, who was a close friend, and who knew me, and he was nervous when he was trying to talk to me. When he said the exact same thing, I was just like, I had to deal with this. And so I, ghosted the world and went to Bali. Because what else does someone do in those moments? Mm-hmm. But in that moment in Bali, I'm in a yoga class, mad chilling, and I didn't even really like yoga until I met this Balinese healer, and I was like, let's try this yoga thing again. And I'm in a Kundalini class, just rolling my neck, and then I get this wave of energy, and this color purple this rolls over me, and I just start ugly crying in a yoga class in Bali, and I just can feel my cousin, who was the one who just passed away from cancer, and I'm like, yo, okay, let's try this again. And I'm like, when I allowed myself to be open to feeling and the energy of my ancestor, communing with them, that's when I felt like I started doing this work and really kind of reconnecting with, okay, this is not just about me, but there's some stuff in the past that I need to heal. There's some stuff in the past that I need to know so I can heal, not just for my ancestors or my, the future generations, but for me personally right now, right here.
Yeah, that is so interesting and so powerful. I've always kind of had those dreams of, just taking off and going to Bali and meeting this person and that person. I've always I read Eat, Pray, Love.
Yeah.
And I just kind of was like, oh, I would love to do that. It just kind of seemed far off. Eventually I would like to do that kind of stuff. But I think that what you said is so powerful, just being open and allowing changes so much. And I'm learning that now. Is like, you have to stop stopping yourself. Like, you are the one that keeps getting in your own way by allowing other people to get in your way. Stop, allowing what other people say to stop you from exploring this or that, or feeling these feelings because you feel like it's not right, or it's crazy, or it sounds, weird, or whatever. Like, no. Allow yourself to feel that. You're feeling it for a reason, and part of it is your intuition. And the only way that you're going to really truly learn to understand yourself and to listen to your intuition and your ancestors is to stop listening to all the outside noise and take a minute to allow yourself to feel what you're feeling, and then kind of, decipher through it and see maybe what's ego and what isn't, and all that kind of different stuff. But I just kind of had that realization in the last week or two of like, you have been stopping so many different things in your life because you feel like you should do it this way, or you should do it that way, or, you don't know how to do it. So, or even because I haven't seen a lot of healthy communicating relationships, thinking that relationships have to look a certain way. There has to be a point of contention, there has to be some angst. There has to be a little bit of drama. And even though I don't necessarily want it, subconsciously, I feel like I was thinking that it had to happen because that's how you relate. That's how you have relationships. And so I've just been having so many intuitive downloads in the last week or two, understanding that how that trauma has affected me and has stopped me from being who I'm supposed to be. And it's just been so mind-blowing, so much information coming through. And I'm like, it's because I am being open to it, listening to it, and not pushing it away. Like you said, not dismissing it and feeling those feelings.
And I love the fact that you are recognizing it as trauma, because when you're talking about I'd love to have that, eat, pray, love moment, but, who am I to do that? I come from this, that's not a thing. And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, immediately, again, where I am now, I'm like, that's the unhealthy pattern of thinking. That's trauma.
Right.
That's ancestral trauma.
Yes.
Saying that, relationships should, quote unquote, be hard. That's ancestral trauma. That's an unhealthy pattern and coping mechanism that we've been taught from generation to generation. For me, I moved to Italy, And I didn't know anyone, not anyone that was of African descent, who just jumped and was like, I'm going to move in another country.
Right.
I don't know why the British accent comes up every blue moon, but it does. But like, my parents were like, no, that's crazy. You're almost 30. You need to be getting married. You should be focusing on your career. And they did what I call the shoulds. I'm like, they should it all over me.
Mm-hmm.
You should do this. You should do that. And I'm like, who's the society? Who's the panel that's in control of the should? Like, who are the judges? Who's the council? Because I want to know, who are these people that we are listening to, that are governing how we think and how we move.
Right. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense too, And I also have been abroad. I was an exchange student for a few months in England. So I got to, that was something else, that was another thing where I did something that nobody had done before. Nobody had ever just gone off and, left to a different country and did this thing. And I was terrified, And for me, I'm kind of like the person who, I kind of plan things out. I know what I'm doing, but I don't really understand the magnitude until I get into it. And so when I get to England, I'm like, dang, I'm alone. Like, I'm like far away from my family, and it's just like, there was one of those things where it was like, I had to take the plunge. It was part of breaking that generational curse. I have to be the first to do a lot of different things, to travel in Europe on my own. And I've been to Italy and I went by myself, and just all of these different things. And you kind of have to, you almost become the role model for the older generation in a way. But it's because it's like, I want to be fearless, and I don't want to have that. I don't want to fear to stop me from doing certain things and trying things. And I think that's part of being that curse breaker, or that new generation maker, whatever you want to call it. I can't really think of the term, but
yeah, I agree with all that. I mean, the thing is, we don't really pay attention to how much that these ancestral patterns influence our lives. It influences our relationships. It influences our relationship with money, to people. Influences how how we work and what we do. It influences our sleeping and eating patterns. It's not a coincidence that African Americans have high blood pressure and diabetes and all these other things that related to stress and all these other things, and that all ties back into this ancestral patterns that are mostly unhealthy.
Yeah, definitely. And a theme for me has been therapy. I'm not sure if you ever, had experiences with therapy, but for me, that has played a key role in me having a lot of these revelations. And it's something that I have leaned on in a lot of times in my life, because it's made such a difference, to have somebody that doesn't know you can give you this perspective that you never thought of, and bring things to your attention that people who are in your daily life can't necessarily give you, and so it's kind of stigmatized, especially in our community. And in my family, we don't tell people our problems. What happens in the house stays in the house, kind of thing. And I don't want to tell this stranger about my business. But at the end of the day, it's like, at a certain point, for me, I can't heal myself in certain aspects. I can do as much as I can do, but you always kind of need somebody. You kind of need a helping hand in some aspects. So for me, having therapy and being open to the experience has helped me heal in a lot of really hard times in my life, and I don't know, it's just something that I'm very grateful for. And I've kind of started, my mom, kind of started doing that too, but nobody's been as consistent as me. So it's another thing where I'm kind of forging the path on my own. And what's your experience like with that?
Well, I'm not shocked that there's a stigmatism around therapy in the, African American community, because again, we were taught to survive.
Right.
And in that survival, we were taught that we need to just act strong. Whether we're strong or not, we need to act strong. And so, yeah, it's not shocking. And again, it's part of this, ancestral trauma that we're dealing with. I hella love therapy. Therapy has got me through so much in my life. And like, The funny thing is, the reason I went to therapy, my parents sent me to therapy as a child because they thought I was the problem child. I'm like, I think it's really you two that need therapy, but whatevs. That really didn't work because I was sitting there lying. I was like, oh, let's just make up stuff. But like when I went to therapy for the first time for real, it's because I was attacked. I was living in DC and I had someone who tried to attack me on the streets or actually in my apartment building. And I was having post-traumatic stress syndrome.
Oh my gosh.
And, from that led to me dealing with, blocking out being molested as a child. I mean, me, dealing with things in my childhood. And throughout the years, therapy has definitely, I've gone in and out of it and it's been helpful. So I'm a strong believer in therapy. But I also think, outside of therapy, that internal investigation.
Right.
And I think a lot of that personal development work has been a huge part of me getting to where I am today. Like therapy has been nice and helpful, but I think of that internal investigation of like, okay, one, the acknowledgement that I am here, like, that map in the mall. It's like, you are here. Okay, I'm here. How did I get here? Why am I here? Do I like being here? What got me here? Where do I want to be? And, investigating all the different things and, and the ancestral trauma is a part of one of those things to investigate has been a huge part in my healing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so amazing, I have the same, thought pattern of when I first kind of was thrown into this spiritual experience of like, okay, I had to shed everything that I thought I believed at that time and start from scratch and be like, okay, so, like with religion, I'm like, for me, Black people are Christians. That's just what we do. We believe in Jesus. We go to church. And I didn't grow up in the church, but I was raised to believe in God. I had those beliefs and those thought patterns and, that kind of just rote thinking. But at a certain point in my life, I'm like, well, why? I felt like I was a 2-year-old. Why? Why? I don't know why, I wasn't raised in the church, I didn't grow up in a Christian household in that way, but I did have that belief and I always had that connection. And so at a certain point, it was like, well, am I Christian? Am I religious? What do I really believe? And I had to take time to understand what that even meant, what it looked like for me, and, go to different church services with different people, Catholic, and get a Bible for the first time and actually read through it and try to get an understanding of what, all these references that I'm making and stuff, what does that actually mean to me? Am I just kind of parroting it because that's what I've been told? Yes, that's what I'm doing. So now, what is it that I actually believe and how do I feel about this topic of religion and spirituality and what does it look like for me? And, finally was able to, after 4 or 5 years, nail it down, an understanding, and then not only nail down an understanding of how I view it, but be comfortable with sharing that with other people without the fear of being judged. Because I feel like, especially in our community, there is a lot of shame if you are not religious or you say you believe in anything other than Jesus or, you're a spiritual person. There can be stigma around that. So, and I think that also ties into, the generational trauma and, you can go really deeply into religion and stuff. But that was something that, too, was another layer that I needed to shed and really think about.
Yeah, and I mean, a huge reason why I created the Hello Well with Danielle platform was to, get out of that survival mode and get out of that and start questioning why. Because we're always, especially for women of color, we're taught like, it just is what it is. You got to be strong. You have to be, powerful, and you can't show emotion. You can't be weak. You need to be the strongest one in the room. And I just want to redefine what that means. And, when I talk about, putting on your oxygen mask on first, like I use the acronym of AIR, which means, awareness, investigation, and redefining. Is like, you got to figure out first, where am I? And asking the why that you were talking about, asking the why do I have to be this way? Why do I have to think this way? Why should I, quote unquote, live my life this way? Why should I not put myself first, or take a moment to pause and celebrate the pause? And that's that investigation. That's, the I in the air. And then thirdly, redefining your mindset. And that's what we're both doing, is redefining how we show up, but we're also bringing awareness to help other people redefine how they show up and shift and start this breaking of these curses and, really creating what I'm calling this wellness revolution. Because it's time for us to get out and thrive and heal.
Yeah, that word right there. And that's something that I repeat all the time to myself. I want to thrive and not just survive. And I think that has been the mantra, especially for the black woman, because for so long, there's a lot of single mothers, or, the high imprisonment rate took the fathers away, or, all those different things. So the black woman is like the foundation. And for my grandmother, she never talked about her childhood. She never talked about her trauma. Until the day she died, none of her kids, her grandkids, we don't really know that much about her. We don't know about her story or who she was before she was mom and granny, And so it was because at a certain point she became a mother, and she was the older sister, and then, she had to be the one to take care of everything. And so it was survival mode. She didn't have time to feel emotions and, go to therapy and feel her feelings. It was like, I got to put food on the table for these kids. I got to make it out of Alabama. I got to make it in California. Like, I have to get a job. And so, that emotional kind of cutoff passed down to my mom. And my dad is the same way. There is no real emotion because there was no time for the parents to show emotion. And so the kids just don't have that connection, which was tough for me because I am very emotional. So to have two parents who are not very connected with their emotion was traumatic, in and of itself, quote unquote. But, that survival mode, I think is where I try to get myself out of, because it's like, I don't have to necessarily do that. I'm a little bit different. I didn't have children at a young age, and I'm not married, and I don't have to go through life in survival mode. I can enjoy life. I can stop and look around, and that's the beauty of being where we are, and all the struggles that they did go through. But I think it's something that I constantly need to remind myself of, and the older generation too, when they're like, hey, why are you doing like that? Why are you, you should be doing this, and this. It's like, I actually don't have to do it like that,
And I love that you were talking about that, because I think about, our generations before, and, and sadly what we've been passing down is, I have to be a strong Black woman. I have to be a strong Black woman. Like, then we pride ourselves on being a strong Black woman, and being a strong Black woman, and stereotypically what we consider being a strong Black woman is sacrificing yourself for others,
Right.
going the strong mile, taking on all these responsibilities by yourself, because I'm a strong Black woman.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality of it all, we're doing this to, celebrate our ancestors because they were strong Black women. But what we're neglecting to remember and to acknowledge is they didn't have a choice.
Right.
They didn't have a choice to be like, I'm not feeling well. I'm PMSing today, so
Right.
I'm going to pass on working in the fields today, or cooking for massa, or, being raped today, because I just don't feel like it. No, we didn't have that capacity. They didn't have it. They didn't have the ability to say, I'm at capacity, and say no. And so they were forced into being the strong Black woman. And I have to believe many of our ancestors are rolling around their graves and yelling at us, but like, yo, I did not go through this for you to now do it when you have a choice.
Right. Yes. That's such a good point. Yes. That makes a whole lot of sense. Like, you just kind of like sparked my brain, because I always love when you think about something, but to think about it in a different way is always like my favorite thing, to have that like, wow, they might be, upset. It's like, for me, what I believe is, once they passed on, they don't have the troubles of the world anymore, and so they don't have to live that way. So to watch us still continue to struggle in certain ways when we don't have to, it's like, that's not why we went through this. We kind of opened the door for you to do better. And I think that we kind of miss that sometimes, and just kind of carrying it on because that's just what we do. And yeah, wow, that was really, really good. Thank you for that.
No, and it's, and we're talking about healing from ancestral trauma and, and healing from slavery, healing from Jim Crow. And as a culture of, African Americans, that's just one side of the coin. We weren't the only players in the situation. Our counterparts, the people who were, the whites and the ones in control at the time, they have their own healing to do for us to all heal as, a nation and as a group, because a lot of things that are systematically in place here in America is because they're dealing from their own trauma of slavery and Jim Crow of, we have to hold on to what's ours.
Right.
We need to withhold information. So it's not just one-sided. That's just one side of the coin. And we all have to do the work, all of us.
Yeah.
For that true healing to occur.
Yeah. And, I have hope that maybe one day it will happen. It's a slow process, let me tell you. I think that it just kind of starts with just one person doing their part, and people like you and I getting together and having these types of conversations and opening up about our experiences, so that it makes it more comfortable for the next person to feel like they're not the only ones and feel like there's an alternative to what they've been doing or what they've seen. So I think this is a really important conversation that we're having, and a dialogue that needs to continue.
I agree. I mean, it's just like Reiki. You look at Reiki, us being, Black Reiki practitioners. It's like, oh, what is this Reiki thing? Or what is acupuncture? The more people who learn about it, the more it becomes popular and more aware, and it's a way of healing. I think the more people who come, aware of ancestral trauma and how it's affecting their lives, and not just their ancestors' lives and the lives of their children, I think the healing will occur.
Yeah. And I think the last point that I wanted to make too is just, I think that by raising awareness, it kind of, like mental health, takes the stigma. It kind of destigmatizes it, and it's not this mystical, Reiki is like, ooh, what are you doing? Black magic, or what is this energy thing? That's, some of my experience, from old school perspectives. If it's not, the Bible and church, it's weird and, it's bad and wrong. And it's like, no, this is just another form of healing, and it's so helpful. So that open-mindedness, I think, comes from people like me no longer being scared of sharing that I do things in an alternative way.
Yeah, and I appreciate you for having this conversation, because I do feel like it's one step, and it's a step that may spark someone else to take another step. So it's needed.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining me today and having this conversation with me, Danielle. I really appreciate you. My very, very first guest on my show. I'm so excited.
I'm so honored to be here, and I just appreciate you for even thinking about me, and just, having this conversation.
Yeah.
Ashe, and I send you love and healing energy for your journey.
Thank you so much. And where can people find you on social media, on the internet? How can people get in contact with you?
Sure. So I am one of those people who dodges social media to a large degree. I won't lie. I'm like, ooh, social media. I'm like, ooh, let's detox from it, because it's a lot. Because there's a lot of shitting going on in social media. But you can typically find me on Hello Well with Danielle. So I'm Hello with Danielle on Facebook. I'm Hello Well with Danielle on Instagram, and on Twitter, I'm Hello Well Danny, because my name is too long.
Right.
Yeah, that's usually the way to find me. And then I do a monthly, healing session that you can find on my website, which is Hello Well with Danielle. And then I also have rogue experiences, but you can get rogue experiences from Hello Well with Danielle.
All right. Hello Well with Danielle. And yes, her Reiki experiences are amazing. That's actually how we met. She found me on Instagram and invited me to her Reiki share. And I really enjoyed it. I loved it. So I was like, this is somebody that I really need to get to know and stay connected with. So I really appreciate you, Danielle. I hope you have a beautiful day. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your time with me.
Thank you.
Bye. Hi, this is Casey, and welcome to Healing with Nama, where we'll be talking about spirituality, life, love, happiness, anxiety, depression, all the things, and getting down to the root of it. I'll be sharing my experiences with you, as well as tips on how you can help improve or enhance your spirituality. So stay tuned, buckle up, and enjoy.